hackathon. We were just really broadening the keywords that we're using on projects, and we got as far as doing all the core packages, which were just the most important. Those are now laden with all the keywords like for all the functionality that those packages hold. I'll leave the non-core packages to future work for myself. But one interesting outcome of doing that is that we decided to start the process of making Komodo a core package. So that's exciting news. I don't think I have anything else to report. Yeah, that's pretty much how it went.
Great, thanks. Yes, I need to send an email to all core packages so that we can get that moving along. Yes, Rebecca.
Can you hear me?
Sure can.
Was I really loud or something? Sorry, Joy.
My headphones are just louder than I thought they were.
Okay, sorry. But one thing is that, you know, the work that we did on the core packages needs to be checked by those packages. Like the package leads need to go through and make sure that the keywords that we added are actually fitting for their package, because we took a good guess. But I know one thing we need Russell, if he's on, I can't tell, to go through and add his instrument names, not instrument, mission names, like the observatories and stuff, because we couldn't find a list.
Oh, yeah, and that reminds me, we did add we added the start of a mission category to the taxonomy that we have here, just in case we ever decide to start filtering by the available missions that the packages support. So yeah, appreciate any help on that. And I believe I already pushed the changes to the keywords on GitHub here. So for any core package maintainers who happen to be on the call, I will paste a link here in the chat, and maybe you can briefly look at the keywords associated with your project now, and feel free to open a pull request to add more, or just message me or something if you want to make any changes. There's the link. Thanks, Rebecca.
Indeed. Cool. Probably worth emailing it out to core package leads as well. I don't think we have all of our core packages on the call at the moment. Awesome. Well, let's see. Laura, who led up the hackathon for Senpai, could not make it today. There was conflict, but she did send me an update. She said they mainly discussed ideas of more examples and tutorials and hosting them, i.e. statically built on Read the Doc, but then went a little off topic, particularly focusing on reprojecting solar images to different coordinate systems. They also discussed benchmarking reprojecting algorithms using Senpai maps and structures together with TensorFlow. And over the next week or so, they'll add a tutorial to the PyHC site on using remote sensing and in situ solar/heliospheric data together for one event. So no notebook directly from the hackathon, but a plan for one to come soon. So that's exciting.
Which, speaking of, that reminds me, I got an unrelated email yesterday from, who was it? I don't know if I'm going to be able to come up with the name quickly, but someone else told me that they had a new example to add to the PyHC gallery, and they planned on opening a PR for that soon.
That's exciting.
So not only from this hackathon are we getting new things for the gallery, and I'm excited about that.
That's awesome. That's great news. Let's see. Eric, you led a PySpeed hackathon.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, cool. I have two mics here, so I have to make sure I'm using the right one. So we were pretty productive. We made 7 notebooks. One that shows how to use error bars on PyTplot variables. One for annotations on PyTplot figures. One for highlighting intervals and doing vertical bars at certain times on PyTplot figures. We made one for symbols and markers, so for changing from just straight lines to symbols and markers, and setting options on the symbols and markers. And we made one for legend options, and we made one for spectrogram options. And so we had 6 PyTplot notebooks, and we also made one for loading data with Happy and PySpeedS. So 1 PySpeedS one. And right now I uploaded all of them to the PySpeedS examples repository on our GitHub repo, but we can upload them other places as well. I'm not sure where to put them, or where else to put them.
Oh, totally. Let me paste a link to, we have a GitHub repo for the PyHC gallery. It's like a sub page that you get when you click the examples tab on the PyHC website. And if I remember the process correctly, we just need you to upload a notebook to a particular folder, and then I can run this little script I have to generate all the Sphinx stuff for the website and redeploy it. But yeah, I'll paste a link to the gallery's GitHub repo in the chat just as soon as I find it. I'd appreciate if you could try to get them in there.
Sounds good.
Thanks, Sean. And thanks, Eric et al. For coming up with so many awesome notebooks. That's great. Let's see. How about Jonathan Smith? I know Brian Harder was supposed to be the CDF lib rep and then couldn't make it, but I'm just curious what y'all were able to do.
We actually managed to get the CDF lib X-ray support working with one of the PySat NASA instruments that I guess that was the thing. We decided which PySat instrument to start with. It's one that has been sort of on the back burner, adding it into the fold because it really needed X-ray support to work as well as we wanted it to. It's some roadie data from JPL. And so we did manage to get that. It's working nominally, I would say. The future work that really needs to happen is to make sure that all the metadata that's getting like matriculated is coming in how it should and meets not only the ISTP standards, but the PySat standards as well. So I think the work that happened yesterday to make this one instrument work has added in the functions that PySat will need for pretty much any X-ray based data set coming into PySat NASA anyway, using CDF lib. So I think a lot of good foundational work got done yesterday.
That's great. Which instrument? I'm just curious.
So right now it's called JPL Roadie. It's coming from on CEDAWeb. So I actually am not very familiar with this instrument. I just know like in CEDAWeb it's under just the GPS Roadie. I will drop a link actually to this into the chat.
Thank you.
Yeah, so yeah, this is just some TEC rate of TEC index data coming out of JPL. I'm not very familiar with this data set. I guess it's not coming from a particular instrument, but in the PySat language, you know, it gets loaded in as an instrument.
Fair enough.
But yeah, it's higher dimensional data, so it needed, or it plays nicer with X-ray than pandas.
Awesome. Well, thanks for that update, John.
Yeah.
Let's see. The other hackathon that took place was for Plasma Pi. Nick was working on that. I know he said he had a conflict for the first hour of this last day of our meeting. So maybe when he hops on later, we can find a good time to pause and ask him for that. But for now, we have discussions for the rest of today. So the first one that we were going to go over was a funding discussion led by Aaron. Let's see, do we have Aaron? We do. Aaron, would you like to kick off that discussion?
Aaron will eventually unmute. Actually, Reiner is supposed to be here too. But
Yeah,
he may be depending on coming at 11:35 or whichever.
that's possible. We could start then instead. I know Russell, yes, Russell is here. We had another discussion that you were going to head up. Actually, let's start with that because maybe Reiner is going to come later.
Yeah, if we can hook Reiner's in some proposal evaluation group, I think, at the same time, of course.
Fair enough.
Did I hear you wanted to start with me?
Yeah, let's go ahead and
All
start
right.
with you. There's, I know, a couple different topics you were interested in bringing up. So
Sure. I've got some slides. Check the time. All right, 10:13. Okay, so things have been really progressing in PyHC since we first started, which is at least about 4 years ago or so, which, wow, time really disappears on you. So I thought it could be a good time to review the standards in PyHC and talk about where it is that we want to go and perhaps some ways to get there. Okay, so some overview of changes since inception. Some of it's still actually in progress, but open source software is kind of now official over at NASA with the pending changes to SPD 41, right, which is great. So I think that rule set already existed in a form, but now it's getting more stuff for, open source is the way to go. And in those proposed rules, it has in there that open source software that is peer reviewed has the same weight as science publication. So that's really, really important. So I think that's for NASA review, but still, I mean, that's, funding. But it doesn't exactly say what peer review is in open source software. So, I mean, we can certainly draw from what it is in publications. But as far as I know, that's not really happening. I mean, at least it's not happening in PyHC right now. Now it might be happening within groups, but usually for a manuscript, if everybody on the manuscript says it's okay, that's not enough to get it published, right? That's enough to get it submitted. So it's not defined by NASA. It's kind of similar how the government operates in other ways. Congress can tend to enact a variety of laws that say do a certain type of thing, but not really specify what that means or how to do it. So they leave it to agencies to sort out and implement. And, it kind of seems like it's a little bit of the same thing here. So that's an opportunity for us to actually define what that means, if we take this opportunity and run with it. I was kind of hoping to follow up with the funding discussion because in at least the tools and methods one, I think it says in there that, packages or submissions to that call should actually be in compliance with PyHC standards and listen to what PyHC says. So that being said, we don't really do that yet. So, what standards are we going to enforce? We do actually have some standards on the books that were previously adopted at a meeting, or at least started at a meeting, and then, kind of went on and then it was voted. So those standards are on the website for just software formatting standards, and that's from December 2018. So that's kind of where we are right now. So I also reviewed the PyHC submissions page. So which thanks to Julie and Sean for all the work and stuff on that. So I appreciate it. Right now, I think the standards as stated are that we accept any package, which I can understand. And then we also note in there that at the PyHC 2020 meeting, spring meeting, we're going to set a date to kick packages off that have requires improvements grades. So we are a bit behind on that deadline. So, I thought it'd be good just to bring it up again. So I'd like to propose that we at least first set a date to remove projects that don't supply a grade at all. If you go and you click on the projects page and you scroll through, there are a lot of projects that don't have anything. They don't say compliant or needs improvement or anything like that. So I think that's at least a first step. Also, I think we should propose another date after the first one to actually start enforcing that requires improvement removal, or at least a package, if they're demonstrating significant improvement in compliance, I think that'd be okay too. I understand, funding is always a challenge, and not every package might have funding over the next time increment to perhaps fully get there. But if we're going to have standards, they don't really mean anything unless we actually apply them. So I think we're going to have to move towards not accepting all submissions. on criteria to be determined. So, I mean, it's a discussion, but I also think it probably needs a subcommittee to hash out all kinds of details and probably come up with process flows and things like that, just to, define a set of guidelines for how the committee or whatever thing we're going to come up with, how they operate, because it's probably just not practical to have everybody involved in everything, right? It's just, and people probably don't have that kind of time. And that's also not how the funding is set up. So, I figure it's probably something that is going to, at a core level, involve the last people. So like Julie and Sean, certainly considering their history. But then we probably need some other people too. So it's not just Julie and Sean, and nothing against all the work that you two have been doing, of course. But just, as we're growing, we need probably more inputs, and we're going to need a bit more structure. And it's just typical in science. And I would recommend an odd number of people, right? That way you don't have an even number, half yeses and half no's, and then you're in a deadlock. So if you have an odd number of people on whatever the committee is, then there's always a, you can't have a deadlock like that. So as long as you require everybody to vote. And also, so if we're starting to get into peer review for software, it's already like half a step, or already pretty much being a journal. So kind of we're evolving to a standard where we publish software and we publish the science manuscript to go along with the software, which makes a lot of sense. But right now there's no link between the standards on PyHC software versus standards that would be applied to a manuscript submitted for that software. So the journal may not be aware of the software standards or may not care, right? They're the journal and they're going to evaluate things on their own metric. And in general, I think it's in our long-term interest to ensure that all of our software releases and the publications that go along with them are up to high standards and a consistent standard. That's just my feeling. If NASA is going to be kind of passing over the opportunity to define what is good in software and how funds are applied and what directions we go in, then if we want to be able to continue that kind of relationship, then you need to do a good job. And in the background of science journals, there's a whole mess of journals in the world and a whole mess of bureaucratic responses to them and responses of scientists to the things that are applied to them. And it's a bit of a, it's a bit of a mess, really. Journals are not intrinsic to science. They kind of emerged as a more commercial entity somewhere after World War II or so. And one of the journals, and I believe is actually Elsevier, figured out that scientists didn't really care about publication charges because they could just put it in a grant. And then the government was fine with paying that. And it just kind of, once the money started flowing, there becomes a natural draw. And then Elsevier in particular really kind of pushes things. They have a lot of charges that go to universities and things like that. And they keep expanding the number of journals. It's like I said, overall, it's a bit of a mess. Elsevier in particular has a profit of $1 billion a year, but a lot of the way journals operate, right, it requires volunteer labor from scientists. And for an open source community where we're going to develop software and give the software away for free, it seems a little inconsistent perhaps to be supporting these for-profit industries that aren't really, I don't think really contributing in a meaningful way. So, and aside of that, universities and agencies will rate scientists based on the impact factor of the journal or some other metric. And it just, you got people going all kinds of different directions, which is how it is right now, but it doesn't perhaps necessarily have to be that way. So some options that we could consider, one, of course, we could just keep things as they are, where people just submit wherever they do and journals apply it. In other ways, we could select a particular journal for PyHC software, and perhaps we could even interact with that journal to let them know that PyHC has certain standards on the software, and we would like those things to be considered as part of publication, stuff like that. Also, if we pick a particular journal, then in terms of evaluation, perhaps by management or other agencies, you can tell them that the selection of the journal in this case doesn't really matter. If it's PyHC software, there's a place that it goes to. So it's kind of like a uniform argument, right? It's not really a choice anymore. Downsides, right? You have to tell people they may or may not respond to it. And as far as I know, the automated index calculators for whatever those, write scores, they're not probably going to care. And of course, journal, then we actually have to find a journal to pick. So just as a place to start, there's Frontiers in Astronomy and Space Sciences. It's an open source type of journal. And it's already hosting a Python special issue. Abstracts and stuff are going to be due here pretty soon. So there's already going to be, a chunk of papers there, and we can perhaps, continue to build upon that. They don't charge more for free downloads. I did look up the price, but I forgot to verify. I just ran out of time this morning, but I looked up the price previously, and I think the most expensive for this particular one was $700. And that is, there's no charges for anybody to download. And then I think there's a smaller option that might have been like $200 or $300. So that's on the lower side as far as journal charges go. The final option is we could create a PyHC journal if we already have some kind of peer review process in place for software. I mean, you can do the same thing, for a manuscript as well. I would suggest that we could use Zenodo for DOI and hosting. I mean, it exists. That's, the EU and all that, I believe, has all kinds of commitments and stuff to fund that for a long time. Anything that gets uploaded there already generates a DOI, so that's nice. And it's freely available to anybody. We could use LaTeX for the formatting, right? We could probably define a template for PyHC that people could just download, and then, right, they input their text and all that. And then we could even, on the other side, use cryptography to, like, the public private key combo things to, if a paper is accepted in our PyHC journal, then we could put, that corresponding key over in the Zenodo page that you could have with the public key from PyHC, you could confirm that it's actually valid. And you could even, put a little button or probably a web process to automate that, so somebody could push it to confirm whether or not it's actually, would be a PyHC publication. You kind of have to choose a fee, though. Zero would be easiest. That would mean, of course, nobody would be getting funded for reviews or being an editor. There would require usually, management support and other things like that. That usually would require funding, so that would probably be incumbent upon the vehicle that's already funding stuff at last, and personnel willing to do it. And of course, willingness on the community, right? It'd be more work. So that's just kind of some of the ideas I wanted to see and stuff like that. Obviously, the journal and all that would be the last. I think the first things is just we should revive our effort on the standards to get that in place. And then, once we get something going there, then move on to perhaps a peer review process for the software. So that's it. Thank you.
Thanks for kicking off this discussion, Russell. Let's see. Rebecca has her hand up.
Everyone, please jump in. I think I'm going to be echoing some of the thoughts in the chat, but thinking about the journal idea, just based on the arguments you already said, Russell, I think it would be a lot of trouble to have a PyHC journal, and a lot of, especially considering we have JOSH, right? The Journal for Open Source Software. That really seems to be the appropriate place to put these things, and they already have this stuff, right? Why invent the wheel again? But so just speaking from experience with that publication venue, Komodo has submitted a paper to them, and their review process does reflect a lot of PyHC standards already, just because it's open source, right? I don't know if they're really going to care about our specific standards for our specific packages. It's just one more thing on their list they're probably just going to not care about. But I mean, that's definitely something that we can enforce from the PyHC, like having it as like a gold star package or something like that. Like one with all the badges completely met, just echoing the current thing. But yeah, I think there's a lot of good thoughts out there based on what I see on the chat, and I'm going to let other people talk now.
Go ahead, John.
So maybe I'm missing this, but why do we need one true journal? Can't we just say, these are the journals we've worked with, these are our recommendations? Recommendations, I think, would be great, but journal open source software makes a lot of sense as a place to point people to, but also I think sometimes we should be publishing in our domain specific journals. If we live entirely in the software regime, we're not going to make contact with the research, which ideally we're supporting through this.
That's a fair point. Like, you know,
a
John,
good
we're
point.
submitting our paper to Frontiers in Astronomy and Space Sciences because Joss actually didn't want our paper.
Yeah, and Frontiers is great.
Isn't it?
A lot of the HU journals will accept methods papers.
Yeah, a lot of the software that we're talking about, though, is software associated with scientific papers themselves, right? It's the software that you used when you did your analysis. It's not necessarily a piece of software you created for its own sake. And in fact, most of the science efforts are going to be things that have software in as part of the effort. It's going to be really, I think we're still at the early stages of figuring out how to sort this out, because are you going to insist that somebody have an executable version or you know, some sort of package that works? Yeah, what's the word that I'm looking for? Container. And do you need a container that makes it possible for people to run your software or whatever? And is the evaluation of the quality of the software for its scientific import, or is it for its that it runs? And it's a lot of work, and who's going to pay, and all those kinds of things. And Russell's brought up some good points. Anyway, I think it's going to be a tricky business. I like the idea of focusing at first on just getting PyHC standards in order and working from there.
It certainly would be a bit of a quote unquote lower hanging fruit. Jack.
Yeah, so what SunPy did is, I think we had a paper in AppJ, maybe. There was definitely, but there was also a JOS equivalent or a JOS addendum. What JOS does is, it is a more direct review of the package, whereas a scientific journal is going to be more interested in what's the science use cases that the package is addressing. JOS is definitely more like they're reviewing the package for the standards that they have. So they're two different standards that are being applied, and so there were two different submissions, one for the scientific audience and one for the more computational package support audience. So there's places for all our packages that we could probably do. We could probably follow that model for all of them.
Some good points. Rebecca brought up that advances in science research is also a nice place and free to publish too. So I guess I'd heard of that one. We have a PyHC paper that's under review, but it was submitted to Advances in Space Research with Elsevier. So part of the problem that Russell was bringing up, it will cost money to publish that one. Yeah, as far as enforcing standards go, we should talk about that. Could you bring that slide up again?
Yeah, and I kind of liked the idea. I know you kind of said it flippantly, Rebecca, but of having gold star packages, flipping the idea a little bit. One of the thoughts I had last time we were talking about when are we going to start strictly enforcing the standards such that we start removing packages from the website and things. I sort of had the idea to, you know, like how the project page right now is already split up between core packages and the rest of the packages. There could be an intermediary stage where we make a third table, like at the bottom, but maybe say it's collapsed by default. So you have to go through a bit of effort to see it. I don't know. And any package that doesn't have any gradings or meets requirements would be booted down to this lesser table here. And then we'd like email the maintainers to let them know that, hey, it's still on the website, but it's in danger of being removed from the website, that sort of thing. So then projects not in that terrible table would be, considered gold starred. I don't know. That was one thought.
I like that idea, because then we're not immediately kicking packages out right away. There's one extra step in between that happening. And maybe it would motivate the 30 odd packages that don't have reviews to submit something.
Yeah, it's the motivation is the hard part, because I mean we
Yeah.
asked people to self-grade a number of times, and asking them more times I don't think is gonna change the results any.
Yeah.
I had
But- If people
yeah.
aren't responsive to the carrot, then the response to the stick is probably going to be to go away.
That's a fair
Yeah.
point too. Like how much do we personally care about having these packages involved with us? Like I've been through the effort a number of times just to grade projects myself instead of making them self-grade. When I've had some free time here and there, I've added badges to projects based on me just looking through their GitHub repos. And I like having a higher number of packages associated with PyHC. It kind of serves the goal better of, bringing everything all under one home. But how far do we go towards doing the work ourselves versus if they're not going to do the work, just let them go?
We
To
can
be
do the
clear,
same thing.
when I say people will walk away if we start using the stick, I think that's a bad thing.
Yeah, I think the way Planetary Data System does this, they have a review of data sets, a formal review of their data sets. There are a number of data sets that have never been reviewed, but they are nonetheless put up on their site, and it just says, warning, this data set has not been reviewed. So we can have still a third category of things down at the bottom of our list saying, these have not passed review. Use at your own risk. So there's no harm in having them there. It's just without the blessing.
Wow.
I'd like to suggest that Reiner Friedel has appeared and that he may have carefully adjusted his time to fit the spot that starts at 11:35. So maybe we could switch to that and maybe even come back to this one if necessary. Does that sound okay?
I think that'll work.
You here, Reiner?
Bring all these.
Hi, Aaron. Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
you hear
there
me?
you are. Yeah, there you are. Yeah.
All right. My panel ended yesterday, so I have no time constraints.
Oh, okay, good. Oh, okay, good. Are we going to switch? Are we going to switch topics or one more to the other?
So, Julie, I sent you the slides for the roses stuff we were going to talk about because I can't display them from my side.
Okay.
Okay. I thought I would give a brief introduction. Reiner, go.
Yes, go for it.
I'm getting a big echo. Maybe.
I think it was when Reiner's mic was also open. I don't know why.
Yeah, go ahead, Aaron.
Okay. So I'll just give a quick introduction and then let you go. So this is the funding discussion, which we've had at some point in each of these meetings. And just as a quick review, what we've done, what I did initially was just hire Alex Ware to put everything together and to collect websites and whatnot. And she did a great job of that. And then she handed it off to Julie. We decided to add a technical person, and that's Sean. So there's a central group which has grown up sort of organically, which is just the two people we see on the top of our screen at the moment. But in the meantime, well, that effort, I think we have to also continually ask the community, what is it you want these central people to be doing? and see if we can arrange to make this work. So far, everything, and certainly most of the things you're doing, like organizing this session, this meeting, has been great. And so we haven't had anybody objecting to what's happening, but if there's suggestions for things that could be done better, that's useful. But the other piece of our funding has gone to what was the HDE, Heliophysics Data Environment Enhancements proposals. And the way that worked initially was Jeff Hayes was too busy to really oversee it, so I had essentially full responsibility for it. And, at some point, there was less of the need for data upgrades, and so I decided to just devote the whole thing to Python, since we hadn't had enough support for Python. And there are things like the AstroPy people who said, gee, they don't have any support for their central activities. So the idea was to bring in some support. So what's happened since then, and we had a few rounds of that, and now we finally gotten to the point where Rainer Friedel has come in from Los Alamos to help out, and he has actually taken charge of this because he does have time to do this, unlike Jeff Hayes did. And so he's the one in charge of the grants programs at this point. And he's the really in charge person. I'll help out when I can. So I'd like Rainer to describe the program that he's been putting together for the grants program. And of course, we want feedback on this and directions and whatnot. So it's all yours, Rainer.
Julie, can you bring up those slides?
Yes, 1 second. All right, you should be seeing them.
Okay, so thank you, Aaron, for the introduction, etc. You know, I've been involved with the HDEE program over the years as a reviewer of the program, and been working with Aaron for many, many years. So I've been quite aware of what goes on there. And coming into headquarters, they sort of told me to be the program officer for this. And we tried to, you know, get it back into the way it's supposed to be run, that, you know, all the roses type of grants and awards get run out of headquarters. And it frees up folks at Goddard to actually do more of the technical side of the house. So I'd like to give a brief update here on the roses, what was and now still is HDEE, and a new thing called HTM. And there's some common updates now. One of the things we changed is that we are trying out the no deadline approach for these calls. This is something that folks at Science Mission Directory are trying out in various parts, Planetary, Earth, and now us as well. And it's quite nicely suited to smaller programs. And it sort of takes care of the fact that Aaron in the past used to get a bunch of out-of-cycle requests that we now have a proper mechanism to review and make part of the program. So these HDE and HTM, you can put in a proposal at any time. The calls are open now. We typically sort of collect them quarterly and then review them. And in the call, there's sort of a rough schedule of when we're going to review them. It depends a little bit about how many we get in. I already gotten a few in on the HTM and HDE, so there will be a review coming up at the end of the month, beginning of June, for the first set of selections.
This is something that I wanted to do from the beginning of this program, and it's really nice to see it happen.
Yeah, I think it's great. It's a little bit more work for us because we kind of have to review them throughout the year, not just once a year, but it's fine. They're small enough. So that's an experiment, and hopefully people will still put in proposals. I know normally, you know, deadlines focus people's minds, and not having a deadline means you might not ever think of it. But I would like to encourage you to keep on putting in these proposals and do that throughout the year whenever you have a good idea or want to move forward with something. The one-year proposals sort of remain the norm, the way Aaron had it. I've put in a option if you have a strong justification to make it a 2-year proposal. This might capture some of the larger efforts that we struggled to fund in the past. And there's also a range of the awards can go from 50K to 100K, with the median award sort of aimed at 75K here. And here are the two links that you could find on the Inspires, and it'll be in the slides that Julie can distribute to everybody for these 2 programs, the B12 HDEE and the new B20 Heliophysics Tools and Methods. Go to the next slide, please, Julie. So the HDEE updates, this is now returning back to the classical task of supporting just data upgrades. The value added enhancement stuff that Aaron had that supported the Python has basically been split out into its own program element. And that's partly to make it separate from the data side and also to give it more room to grow. We are anticipating that as NASA and ROSES moves more to open science standards, that so the ecosystem such as the PyHC ecosystem for making things public, for sharing codes, is something that people are going to be doing more and more. And the HTM program is meant to be something that grows and fills the roles within all of ROSES for folks to take their codes that they developed as part of their grants and other bits and pieces and make them available into a curated system such as PyHC. So that was the sort of a rationale against splitting out the HTM from HDEE. So for the HDEE side, since, as Aaron said, sort of the classical old data upgrades that people did from the days when they were not forced to submit that data, so some old legacy data that needed to be brought into the fold of the SPDF system. Those, I think, by and large, maybe have been done by now, at least the simple ones. So we extending this data upgrade that it now covers all relevant satellite data sets, not just NASA missions. So if you have an NSF CubeSat mission, there's a specific one for that, for the CubeSats. But if you have a DOE mission or a NOAA mission of data, then you want to bring it into the SPDF, you can do that now as part of this core. And the other extension is that if you have data that is actually not currently public, which is one of the NASA rules, you typically can only take public data as input into a core. Here we want to actually bring data that is either proprietary from companies or that is coming through some classified routes like the LANLG or GPS data, and provide a way of giving folks funding to make those data public. So here we are the go-between between something that is not available to the public and making it available as a public data set. And then this time around, we have a special data upgrade that's targeting specifically CubeSats, since CubeSats are the ones that have the most challenge in terms of funding and resources to really produce good data sets that are then also useful for the science community at large. So those are the updates for HDEE. And next slide. So the new program, it's I don't have to say much about it because I basically stole most of the things into this program from what Aaron had done for the value added enhancement option. So it is exactly that part. It's just called a new thing, HTM. And it's directly aimed at this community for the PyHC folks to bring in efforts and to maybe provide wrappers to other types of codes that are not currently part of PyHC, so that they can be accessed in this ecosystem. There's a large amount of stuff out there that is, of course, not written in Python, but that can be wrapped in a nice way to make it available through this. So this is very similar to what Aaron had. And as you guys are busy in the workshop, I would like to encourage you to think of specific topics that you might like to see in this call. If there are certain things within what you do in PyHC that you want to call out that need to have a special focus for a call, I am more than open to taking suggestions, and maybe Aaron can collect those for me as the workshop goes along, so that we can make this a good vehicle for driving forward this PyHC ecosystem. I should add that within the Science Mission Directory, there's currently a large effort on open science fair standards, etc. And there's a lot of discussions about, not just forcing folks to make the codes open source. Anyone can put things on a public GitHub, but to make it a useful utility that people can easily use, I've been promoting the PyHC way of doing things as one way of having a more curated product that is actually useful and not just a assembly of loose code that people would still have to put a lot of work into to make work for themselves. So it's been nice to have this as a way of advertising the way that the heliophysics community, at least, is embracing the open science standard. And then I think we're a little bit ahead of the game with PyHC compared to some of the other divisions. So thank you very much for all your efforts here in pushing this forward. And that's all I have. I'm happy to answer questions.
Hi, Reiner. This is John V. I've got a question for you.
HDM stands for Heliophysics Tools and Methods.
Yeah. Can you hear me, Reiner?
Yes, I can hear you.
Great. The one of the things, the NASA open source initiative and the SPD 41, they were looking for feedback there. And with white papers, one of the things that I suggested was for that effort to try and bolster ongoing grassroots efforts within the divisions, like PyHC, which I think is working very well. So is there any chance of that some of that TOPS money would come to the divisions and the divisions would have leeway on how to direct it?
Yeah, that's something I've always been sort of fighting, because you have the sort of top-down approach from folks at the directorate level of Science Mission Director trying to push this, and then there's all these grassroots effort that have been bubbling up from the bottom, and sometimes these are quite disconnected, and people end up reinventing the wheel. And I'm having that active discussion with them to make sure that down the line we can get more efforts into this. I should have added another Rose's element in here. This is part of I think it's F8. It's the interdisciplinary one. There's money available for people with past grants that want to make their software public to get some extra money to do this. And we've added some language into that call to encourage folks, at least from the Helios side, to then direct their efforts towards making their software part of the PyHC ecosystem. So there might be folks that get funding through that route that are going to be joining this crew. So this is one way in which we are trying to use division-wide money for open science. That's what this F8 is, F.8 is funded out of. Use this division-wide money to support efforts like PyHC and to get that ecosystem to grow.
I think this is a big issue at this point, and there's a NASA effort that's supposed to be like $25 million a year. At least they were hoping for that. I don't know if it's going to be, but there are 5 divisions, so that's roughly $5 million a year per division. And FY23 is supposed to be the year of open science at NASA. So, and we've been trying to figure out how for instance, the data system, the Heliophysics Digital Resource Library, as we now call it, which used to be HPDE, how we can benefit from that and help the community along using cloud resources, for example. And it hasn't gelled yet, to my mind, and Reiner's a little more close to the people at headquarters, perhaps, with trying to get input.
They're still dealing with some basic problems, and one of the things that at least folks within the NASA community have a big problem with is that the NASA process internally to make things open source is so cumbersome and broken that no one can currently really use it, and that's something that hasn't really been addressed yet and needs to be addressed. How exactly the monies are going to flow, And we are trying to make sure that we don't end up with a whole bunch of demands and no money to actually then do it. So we don't want this to turn into a huge unfunded mandate.
or a top-down design program. That's the other issue.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's a real risk here because the people that are running the TOPS thing are not too connected to these kinds of efforts, and they'll just make statements that, well, they're good, and in general, I support all of them, but just they're just naive about how it's actually done. So
right.
You're in an important role, Reiner.
Yeah, and I'm trying. I am on those meetings, and I can tell you there is a hell of a lot of meetings with very little substance to them at times. a lot of bloviating is going on, and then every now and so often I try and ask the hard questions, and then people go, "Oh shit, we haven't thought about this one." You know, the big elephant in the room is that they're trying to come up with this open software, and they have all the nice words in SPD 41, and they have no system in place to catch the software. Right? It's the cart before the horse, and it's a little bit disconcerting.
Put that in a white paper. It's like they started off with data curation is so important and it requires resources. And then the whole thing was about software curation and nothing about the resources to do software, which is, I think, harder than data, especially because of intellectual property issues. So,
well, I think, look,
let
me try and explain at least one of the silver linings I see here. And that is that this whole open source thing was driven down by congressional mandates, and every agency in the government is under the gun to show that they're doing something. So right now, a lot of the activity that you see is to fulfill the mandate that you are seen to be doing something, okay? And how the details are going to work out down the line is sort of, well, let's get the hounds away from the door that are barking first, and make them happy that we are tackling this. And then we'll work out the details, because there is realization that this is a change in the way people think. It's going to be a change in the way people need to allocate resources, and it's not going to happen overnight. So the whole process is a fairly slow one, where you know, the way it's going to be enforced and implemented is going to take several years. So there is going to be hopefully time, John, to address some of your concerns and to make sure we end up with a good end product that people are happy with.
Do you have any insight where all those open source response white papers went? Did they actually?
Yeah, no, they have been collected and collated, and I'm supposed to review them as well, and I haven't done so yet. So it's actively being worked right now.
Great, thanks.
The data system white papers are also things that have been put through the system, and they seem to be coming up with recommendations that are pretty similar to the things that we had from our workshops and whatnot. But we'll get a report from that soon. I feel like we've come full circle back to the discussion that Russell started.
A bit, yeah, haven't we?
Pete Riley has his hand up.
Yeah, go for it, Pete.
Yeah, go Pete. Sorry, I was looking at some of these roses.
That's fine.
posts.
I had to step out earlier, but just based on what Reiner was saying about the white papers, is now a good time to loop in the conversation from earlier this week about writing the decadal white paper, or did you already discuss that?
No, we have not gotten.
No,
to
that's
them
a
yet.
good idea.
Mhm.
Did you have thoughts?
No, I'm actively writing one on a different topic, so I just wanted to mention it as a possible topic of conversation.
Yeah, I certainly think it's important for people to express their opinions on these and to get the things in on white papers. I was planning on doing one on the data system and its relevance to all these topics, and sort of a general one with lots of signatures, but there can be specific ones that other people can have other views. So I think it's an important thing to do. This is one of those things where these kind of white papers are essential. It's not necessarily that you're going to get things that different from what you wanted, but if you haven't put yourself out there on the table, then you're not going to be part of the conversation. So it's important to be there.
Generally, the white papers are for some strategic mission concept or some kind of a grand plan, whereas a PyHC type white paper is more, this is important and it's the glue, it's integral to
In fact,
everything.
In fact, if you look at the call, these are actually explicitly called out. The infrastructure is called out explicitly.
Okay.
So there is a place where this fits. It's number 3, I think, in their list of categorized types of topics. But it's definitely there. You should look at the NRC or whatever the website is. I don't have it offhand, but
okay.
But it's definitely part of the issue. Even last time, the last version, we submitted a paper then, and it was fairly useful. But there was a lot in the decadal from last time about what should be done with data systems, and we've been following that, in fact. So it's a useful exercise.
Okay.
I've got a question for Rainer. Rainer, you mentioned that you think PyHC is further ahead along whatever curve we're on in regards to sort of community organization of software. Do you know the state of play in the other science divisions at NASA?
No, not really, because not much has been presented there. I get the feeling that everybody is scrambling to try and make sense of the demands that are coming down, and the thinking is just starting. So I have not heard. That's why I mentioned it. I have not heard anything that is similar to what we've done in the Helio from the other divisions at this point. The ones that are probably the furthest ahead of the Earth Science, since they have a technology office that specifically deals with data. And Helio is in the process of setting up HESTO, the heliophysics technology office that's going to be run out of Goddard, I think. So we are positioned well to help move this forward for NASA as a whole.
Yeah, I can think of small projects like AstroPy that a lot of the astrophysics community are behind, and like X-ray and Pangeo in earth science. I'm not very familiar with planetary, so I couldn't speak to that, but those are kind of individual packages as opposed to larger umbrella organizations like PyHC.
I found the quote I was looking for. Am I unmuted?
Yeah.
I found the quote I was looking for from the decadal survey. It says the report from the survey committee will, and there are two bullets, and the third bullet is develop a comprehensive ranked research strategy that provides an ambitious but realistic approach to address the science goals. The strategy will include consideration of data and computing infrastructure needed to support the research strategy and long-term utility, usability, and accessibility of acquired data, as well as the combination of ground and space-based investigations and the international landscape, interagency collaborations. So the data and computing infrastructure has got an explicit fallout in this. What the survey committee is supposed to report. Any other questions or concerns?
So, so never having, for a package submitted myself to HDEE itself before, obviously this new HTM program, do either of them have some kind of funding mechanism for helping maintain current projects? Because I know that's one thing I feel like I've heard people talk about in the past is it's great to be funded to have a new one-off idea or a specific upgrade put into your project, but sometimes it's hard to just, keep code up to date and maintain it because there's not as much of a funding mechanism for that. I was just curious if either of these.
That is an issue, and I don't think we've fully addressed that. I mean, I think there are people like SunPy as a developer. I think there are people who are sort of general support for that, but I don't know of any way of, if you have a package that needs help, how to do that. In principle, you can apply to these programs. They haven't emphasized, they've more emphasized the new stuff. It's true. What about F8? Is that do we lose?
Yeah, I'm not sure if could F8 cover that. Reiner, do you know much about that? I haven't gotten to really look into this yet.
Do we lose Reiner?
What was the question? Sorry.
Whether FA will be able to support of maintenance.
So I still don't quite get it. Maintenance of what?
Software.
Software. Maintenance of software, keeping software up to date, that kind of thing, when it's not necessarily that you want to add a new big functionality to a package or create a new package, but you want to take a package that currently exists and have the funding there to give developers time, to maintain it, because it does take time just to keep code, living and usable.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see why that shouldn't be something that can be covered under the HDM program. If it's a generally useful thing that you need to do, and you can show you have a large user base and there's X amount of work that needs to be done to make it run on a new architecture or updating the various versions and dependencies and so on, I think that can be done. But one of the things I think that Aaron can talk to is, to get out of that loop of having to, constantly update and maintain, you can also just have things in a container, sort of hermetically sealed in a way that'll work, guaranteed in that container. And then you basically maybe at a lower cadence update the container every 5 years or something like that.
But Reiner, containerization just means that it works in isolation. What you need is software that will work with other software as it gets updated. So like as NumPy gets updated, you're getting all the advantages and benefits of that. I mean, if we just do it, seal it up and put it away, we wind up in, Aaron Morrison searching eBay for Vaxes.
Well, I'm trying to find the sweet middle ground, the middle ground between constantly being on the upgrade treadmill and at what cadence does it make sense to do.
But that's what it needs to be. If software is going to actually be useful, it's not a house, it's a plant. And
this is one of the.
Yeah, go ahead, Aaron.
Go ahead. I was saying this is one of the big problems with this.
Yeah, and so what we need is not the ability to say, I have these particular bugs or this new version of things, but it's like, in order to keep this thing happy for the next 2 years, I need to be able to have some amount of funding for a developer at a fairly low level just to deal with whatever it is that comes up.
Yeah, I mean, then there we run into the basic problem that what we do at headquarters is all proposal driven, and what you're looking at is more infrastructure stuff. So that's a
Yep.
discussion that maybe we need to have with our friends at Goddard and Aaron and others there to see how that can be put. I mean, Aaron,
There
you've
are a
been doing
number of
something like that
programs.
because you've been supporting those kinds of efforts already, like
Yeah.
things like Jeremy Faden's Autoplot has sort of gotten into that
Right.
route of being now funded.
HelioViewer, which Jack Ireland is the lead of. HelioViewer for a while was depending on grant after grant, but it became clear that this was a resource that the community cared about. It's one that even if it went down, people would complain. So, it's got some followers.
So what would you like us
So
to do?
what we did is we incorporated it into the infrastructure and made it just part of a standard funding line. Now that's something you can do. You can't do it for everything. So you have to be able to decide, and that's an interesting question of how to do that.
Yeah, so should we just write you an informal letter, Aaron, or should we submit something to HTM, and maybe if that's deemed out of scope but otherwise appropriate, it gets yanked out of the stream?
Well, certainly writing a quick email to me or couldn't hurt as a starting point if you had things like that.
Okay. Sounds good. I'll start with that and then we can get more formal. Because part of this is a chicken and the egg, that in order for people to really be relying on stuff, it needs to have the inputs and the maintenance that means they can rely on it.
Is this the DP processing thing you're thinking of?
No, I'm thinking SpacePy.
Oh, SpacePy. Yeah. Okay.
Because, stuff like installers and that kind of thing. DB processing, I mean, would be great as well, but SpacePy is my bigger concern right now.
Yeah, okay. We actually do have some support for SunPy and for PySpeedS at this point as infrastructure. So SpacePy maybe that all the core packages have to be looped into this somehow, and then it hopefully doesn't become too expensive.
I think that would honestly make sense for the core packages to have some level of support.
Yeah, I think that may make sense. We have to. So you can send us an email and we'll start the discussion.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think that would be a good idea to apply that to the core packages. So I'm in favor.
I think also
Here's
having developers on the PyHC organization, stuff like Julie and Sean, get familiar enough with some of those core things, they can help with the maintenance itself, right? That
would be great.
Yeah, a kind of a
like SunPy had Stuart Mumford. I'm not sure who it is now. Jack can tell us.
Stuart's still working on SunPy, but Will Barnes is on the US side.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, he's supporting SunPy.
So this is
yeah,
that kind of infrastructure
PyHC support does, yeah, but having people on PyHC that's part of their role too, is actually getting in the code and knowing enough to contribute regularly and help with that.
Yeah, I think technically that was part of the original motivation with what Sean's doing. He's just, we have a lot of ideas that have come up for the tech lead to do, and so that's not been something that he's been able to devote time to.
That is indeed true.
Yeah. Also, it would be helpful if someone in that role was a heliophysicist or had a lot of that background, I think. Sean's mentioned that to me before, so I don't know, maybe this points to a need for a third person on our grant at some point in the future who does that. Your thoughts, Sean?
Yeah, I don't know where the money would come from, but I have made the argument before that it could be a pretty strong selling point to play well with PyHC if we had kind of a floating developer that could, go around and address GitHub issues or contribute to your project, just to be kind of like a free developer for you in a way, and the person would just kind of field PyHC code issues as it came up. They would have to be like an expert heliophysicist and good at Python and stuff to do that job well. But if we could afford it and if we offered that kind of thing, I think that'd be a really big carrot for people to come and say, I want my package to be in PyHC. I don't want to follow their rules.
Nick
Yeah.
But
brought
I
up
do
that they
think
could
that
do-
I think that that can be an and. I think both that and some more direct support for the packages makes a lot of sense because those are overlapping but not identical.
Right.
Sure.
All these things go into our HDRL, Human Physics Digital Resource Library package. We presented this a couple of days ago to the to headquarters folks as part of the standard. It's called PPBE process. Some of you may be familiar with it, but we are asking for a fair amount more resource for various things, including things like the HelioCloud effort. But ultimately, things like this get mixed in the soup, and we have to figure them out. And it's a question of, at some point, of priorities. We only have a finite budget, however
Yeah,
large it
well-
can grow to. But these are important things to include in the mix.
Yeah, well, Aaron, maybe you're the right person to pose this question. You know, if we're talking about bringing in more resources for PyHC, obviously we need to request those resources and prove ourselves worthy of them. If we do a really good job with the summer school and, you know, we get a good impression from hundreds of worldwide participants, and if we even start going the direction of like holding our own conference and things, does that make us look better in the eyes of the funders?
Sure.
Sure. Good, good.
Figure.
I mean, I'm
Yeah,
kind
I
of
mean,
being
it's-
special for asking it that way, but yeah.
It can't hurt, right? It can't hurt. I think the summer school effort is, we'll cross our fingers, but it's looking quite good. And it's motivated a lot of changes in the system.
Mhm.
As an example, SolarSoft has received funding for a long time. SolarSoft, however, is used by lots of missions and a lot of scientists still. So it's kind of cost effective to maintain SolarSoft, because by doing that, we maintain a lot of the other like scientific research capability for those using SolarSoft, and also like mission data processing pipelines written in IDL. So there is a model for all of this, of like supporting core packages that are known to be used by the community and have a key, like a keystone in a bridge, so to speak.
Yeah, I think that's the critical thing, is that they should be clearly of use. And one of the things that's come up as an idea in general is to do things like SolarSoft and have support for missions as they come along, so that they don't have to write everything from scratch, and so that there's a lot of stuff out there that allows them to be much more efficient about making their data systems. And SolarSoft has served that role quite well in solar physics. SpeedS has, to some extent, a similar role in space physics. But some of these other packages are doing this sort of thing without the support, and probably should have support.
Yep. Well, any other thoughts on everything funding? I know, Rebecca, you've put a lot of thoughts in the chat. I don't know if you want to speak to any of them or if you just want to leave it there.
Well, part of it is I have a little one in the room, so she's not always quiet enough to talk. So forgive me for bombing the chat. I think there's a lot of value in the discussion right now because a lot of the larger packages, even those not at PyHC, that have a large user base in the community and have become kind of a standard analysis software like SolarSoft and like a lot of the like SunPy and SpacePy and so on. It's becoming a huge resource for the community to use to access the data, to analyze the data, and just make life easier for the researcher. And I think if we kind of take it to the complete negative, right? If the community suddenly lost that package, what would we lose? If the answer would be everyone is going to throw a fit because that's what they use, then that package needs to stick around, right? And so just like the cloud capabilities are becoming a matter of infrastructure and considered, okay, well, now we need software engineers to maintain that capability. I think we need to start thinking about these software capabilities the same way, because if it's completely vital to a reasonable size of researchers for their research, we need to keep providing that infrastructure for them. And by using that phrase infrastructure, I'm saying that we need to start considering some of the most used packages as part of our infrastructure. So maybe that gets funded as part of an archive. You hear my little one. Maybe that gets funded as part of, like it's brought on to part of these data archives, or maybe
Yeah,
there's some other way to do that.
And in fact, that is happening. As I say, we do fund VSO and SolarSoft and SpeedAS and some of these things at some level. But we have to figure out exactly which set and at what level. But it is happening as we speak.
Right. So maybe that maintenance, the whole maintenance problem and these kinds of problems with funding, maybe that can be resolved in this way for some of the more substantial packages. And in order for new packages to gain that kind of status, well, they need to show the same kinds of things. And the bullet point list of, okay, accomplish this, accomplish this, accomplish this, and then you can become part of infrastructure. That needs to be solidified. We're not mature enough to do that yet because we don't have enough packages that have gone through the process yet. But so that would be in the future. That's my thoughts for now.
Sounds good.
And of course, I'll just throw Happy in the mix here for this infrastructure stuff. It's in one
Yes.
sense even more hidden infrastructure because it's there's nothing to plot out of it, or but it does help connect a lot of pieces together underneath, and we're still pushing on promulgation this year, which is getting other folks to adopt it, making it easier for data centers. Yeah.
Again, we supported it, but we have to sort of filter it into the standard infrastructure.
The hidden
Right,
nature is very important. Important stuff may not. The hidden thing I think is very important, John. That very important stuff a lot of people use, they might not know they use.
Right. Yeah. It's hard to convince a scientist to care about it. And in fact, we really don't want them to care about it. We want it to be transparent, but we do want them to understand the importance of it. And it's really like I don't know what the analogy is, a chicken and an egg and a chicken processing factory problem, right? That you have to have the whole thing in place before that low level infrastructure, the benefit is shown up to the end users.
Russell has his hand up.
Yeah, go ahead, Russell.
So I'll keep it brief because I just want to support the argument of the core packages getting funding. Though I guess it is biased because I would like to get some of that. PySat doesn't have any funding at the moment. It is being used by Icon and some other things, but those funds are going elsewhere. So thanks.
But I also like to just, while we try and make the sausage of how to maybe fund some of these core activities as more of an infrastructure thing, in the meantime, that does not stop you from not putting in an HDM proposal to help support this.
Yeah, that changes that's new and changes the equation, right? So we should definitely be leveraging that. And I think
Yeah,
also
I mean,
too,
it's not specifically called out for, but that's why I'm asking for feedback. If there are certain things that you think that should be called out for support, then we can make that officially part of the call going forward.
well, what people are saying here is that specific migration to a longevity or sustainability position within PyHC for core packages, that's already a category that we're seeing here. So that's one option you could put in there, Reiner. And another thing too is that, and we're starting to see this in more of the mission calls, where the missions are being asked, please follow the data management plan and follow the standards for heliophysics. But maybe we should also be telling them, don't go reinvent your tools, and have requirements in there that say you must choose from, we're not there yet, but I'm just thinking out loud. You must choose your tools from the available set or justify why you have to make new ones. And your mission should support the tools that exist and fund them for the development necessary for your mission. I mean, this happens already with SPDOS, right?
Yes.
And so why not kind of canonize that process that missions should likewise support the things that they're going to be using, and they can provide developers, and there could be a way to sort of officialize that process.
Yes, that's well said. I mean, we've been certainly working in that general direction, but that's an articulate version of it.
I mean,
My white paper.
I've heard misgivings from instrument folks. I'm on one of the teams for I'm on the tracers team as the mission scientist, and when they looked at the open software requirements, which they are not currently required to follow because they're grandfathered in under the old way of doing, so it's kind of a best effort, be nice if you could type of thing. They're not going to get any extra money for it, but they're very wary about being on the hook for having to maintain their mission software, like all the satellite processing stuff. I mean, it's supposed to be made available and be archived, but there's currently no requirement to actively maintain those codes so that they can still run. And for anyone who's ever tried to go back to an old mission and use their level 0 to level 1 processing code, it's a nightmare to try and do that. I've done that for IC2. It took a year and a postdoc to do it.
That's funny. That was one of the first things I did at APL, was work on IC1 and 2 data, trying to reconstruct it from level 0. It's very hard.
We had the Fortran 2 code that was running on a VAX finally onto a Unix machine, and when it ran, the code stopped halfway and a message flashed up on the screen which said, call 378 and ask them to change tape.
Wow. But the point that you mentioned about instrument teams being leery of these kinds of top-down requirements is absolutely relevant. And so that's why, it needs to be a back and forth. And in heliophysics, it's kind of happened from the bottom up, where people eventually agreed to the standards that were there because they made sense. If we could do it the same way with the tools and not just the data formats, then it will work. If we try to impose and say, thou shalt use SPDAS and only SPDAS, then you're going to get a lot of pushback. But if missions just end up using SPDAS or PySat or SpacePy or whatever, we can say, look, here's your set of tools. Use one of these, or you have to write a really big justification for, hey, this instrument doesn't fit into any of these tools, so we really do need something new. So it's wishful thinking at this point, but a debate back and forth would be good on this.
Send me an email.
Yeah. Now, Aaron, I don't know whether you, Aaron, I don't know whether you have any stats at your end on how often people have actually gone and tried to run some of these old instrument softwares like 10 years later, because we have to be wary about not coming up with a whole infrastructure requirements and things that take a lot of work if it ends up not actually getting used all that often.
Right. No, it's the longevity like that of software. In fact, the version 1 of the heliophysics data policy, I put in the idea that for the long term, what you really want is the best process data. And yes, you should keep the software and the algorithms around, but what's going to be useful in the long term is the best process data. There are very extremely few examples of somebody going back and finding something. There was a thing where the Pioneer spacecraft was seemingly not quite behaving correctly in terms of the gravitational field, and they had to go back and dig into it. It was a worthwhile exercise to figure out that it was actually due to the sun and solar pressure.
Our use case with the IC data was that we inherited a whole bunch of tapes from Ted Fritz that actually had never been processed in the first place. So they ran out of money to actually process all the money from all the data from the mission. and you know, there was a whole bunch of stuff that was just not accessible. So that's why we had to do that.
Right. So there are occasional cases like that, but even then you have to ask: did anybody actually do research for the result?
Yeah, we did.
Maybe we
did on that lot.
Okay, in that case, that's good. But that is the kind of case you have to make. And I've always argued that highly processed, the best effort of the teams is what you want to preserve, and it's very difficult to use the other. And
I should
very seldom done.
Just to finish that anecdote, Ted Fritz, who was a US person and collaborator on IC, ended up sending that data over to the Max Planck Institute in Germany, where I was, because he couldn't find the money to do the work in the US.
Rebecca, you have your hand up.
Thanks. Kind of one quick thing and then an example in the current conversation. So John, I can't really discuss it much because I completely agree with you. John Vandergriff. Yeah, but for the current conversation, there's a big example in astrophysics where now astrophysics is our close friend, right? Not as close as earth science, but still pretty close for the solar people. But there's an example, and I cannot remember the instrument name right now, so my apologies on that. But there was an entire data set from a large mission that the highest level process data was done incorrectly, but for reasons they did not understand at the time. In fact, we're still researching why and how it should be done. But in the past 10 years or so, they've figured out the correct way to do it. But so there are going to be large data sets in any field that the most processed level of data could be completely wrong for reasons we simply haven't discovered yet. So I think offering level 0 data is kind of unreasonable, right? They at least need to be calibrated for, in astrophysics, calibrated for energy, or in particle physics, calibrated for particle energy and such things, because that's particular to the instrument. But any level of data that involves processing where it's background subtraction of this field or correction for this such and such a variable, I think that should be viewed as, yeah, it's the best we can do right now, but there may be some things we discover later that warrants that being completely redone. So keeping that idea in mind, we need to maintain access to lower levels of data, not level 0, right? But at least the calibrated data that hasn't been background subtracted or similar things. And maintaining access to that data could be quite important in later research.
Yeah. And we're trying to do that soon.
Agreed.
So Aaron,
John.
I'd also say that the significance of having quality, well-maintained mission processing code is not just in if you have to reprocess that mission. It's that as that stuff matures, it can potentially come into a one of our more generic core projects and be used on future missions. It's kind of ridiculous, but we're rewriting all of the IBEX processing for IMAP. Right, that should not happen, but because of the pressures involved in delivering the IBEX data, it wound up being code that's just not reusable.
Well, now there's a requirement to have the algorithms preserved.
John V.
Yeah, so I was just going to push back on Rebecca a little bit and say, I think level 0 you should save because even the calibrations need updating. And that I think having archived that even that level 0 to level 1 software, it is important mostly for that reprocessing need, but it's so rare that it doesn't have to be like preserved and be live and runnable at any time. It just needs to be able to be resurrected by the team or the errors of the team if it's later, so that you could do it if you needed to. But that's a much different need than a live need to always be able to start with level 0, and that's where you go from. I think I'm agreeing with Aaron then in saying the best product is that final data, that's what you're going to give to people. And but just having some way to go back and redo it if you needed to, it's going to be expensive, but it's worth it because we're going to fix the whole thing.
Well, that's
And
where we
then
have
you
these
don't
algorithm
mind.
documents.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's where you don't
Yeah.
mind going through a more expensive process. And then you don't have to pay the constant maintenance. You can containerize it. And then that transition, oh, we have this old container, it still works, but now we need to get running somewhere, you know, there's different levels of it. Oh, and one other comment too, what John Niehoff was saying about reusing the processing software is, and we find this happening at APL all the time. Projects pay for their own things and they don't pay for making anything generic. And so having money available that says, as I do my mission project, I will get extra time from this grant to make it generic. That would actually be super useful, because then you could take what you're doing on a mission and then get a little bit of extra time to think about the next mission, which no current mission is going to pay for and probably legally can't. So having the right mix of active project plus generic thinking at the same time would be useful.
I agree. Russell, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. So just the notes about mission software and keeping that stuff preserved or even potentially operable. I mean, I know I'm always bringing up PySat for stuff, but that is one of the design features of PySat is the mission processing. And, you know, that's the thing of, I did it for Icon, Cosmic 2, and Sortie, the CubeSat. So I've already got 3 and CNOP. So kind of like 4 missions I've processed through PySat and then distilled all that kind of, on one side, you need the science versatility, but then you need all the actual data and file support. So PySat can help manage all the data and file support, leaving the scientists to do the actual algorithms. But in terms of preservability, then if it's written to PySat and PySat continues to get maintained, then, you know, by a certain year, I mean, like NumPy and all that's being released by years now. So if you know the year the mission came out, you can go and get PySat and you could still actually run the software using the Python releases at the time. And of course, if all the algorithm stuff is separated from all the messy details of the file and stuff, then it's also easier just to take that algorithm and pop it into a different system if needed, or maybe, you know, hopefully just a current version of PySat. But so there are some options with our current PyHC software that we could, you know, continue to build upon to help with the mission stuff. Thanks.
True. Any other thoughts on all things funding? Got a lot of good ideas come out of this discussion, I think.
It might be worthwhile to share a little perspective from what Komodo has gone through. I think Komodo, I'm not trying to toot Komodo's horn, just offering a different experience, right? So Komodo actually started with an archive instead of starting by itself. Astro Pembroke is the one that, I guess the word invented would be the best choice, but came up with the whole idea for Komodo because CCMC's previous versions of model data access weren't doing so hot, right? So from Komodo's background, coming up from an archive movement rather than from a community movement, it's been very interesting, right? So it's our current status right now is that, yeah, I'm going to have a job for a long time at CCMC because as long as we have model data, I have a job, right? But we also have an interesting balance because the core capabilities of Komodo are now hosted by a commercial entity who has found ways to sustain themselves and to advance those capabilities. And then we're in partnership with them for things specific to CCMC. So now the commercial partnership is getting funding from, I forget the acronym right now. Of course, it's 4 letters, but I can't remember it. But the SBIRs, right? The SBIRs, but also other commercial companies that want those features. But,
Is
but
Asher,
say again, Aaron, go ahead.
is this Asher's thing?
Well, Asher's not the lead of the company, but he is employed by it.
Okay.
Is that what you're asking?
That's the connection.
Okay.
I'm guessing, I'm just asking.
Sure. So if you want the names of leads on company, just email me and I'll send it to you. But it's kind of a different way, different funding that happened to come about for Komodo. So I guess I'm saying that to say that the packages that come up as part of infrastructure may not always come from a mission or a science goal. It may actually come up once in a while from the archives themselves, where they need some sort of functionality, so they develop something. Maybe that gets merged with one of the packages that already exist, or there's some sort of partnership there. But there's going to be some interesting things that come up, just because archives need what archives need for different fields.
Thanks. Any other thoughts before we maybe transition back to Russell's topics he brought up? I know there were some points that were made in the chat once we switched discussion topics. If not, can always bring them up later. Thanks again, Aaron and Reiner, for leading that discussion. Much appreciated. So, Russell, we had been talking, going back in the chat, trying to remember what the last thing people were talking about was. It was having to do with, splitting out projects, and do we want to actually kick projects off of our website? Probably not ideal.
Sure.
But yeah, I know like Rebecca, Sean, I think you guys were talking in the chat about this. I don't know if you wanted to go back and bring up your thoughts again. It's a little bit up there now, but.
Yeah, it looks like I did see some, can of course let Rebecca and stuff brings up today, but generally I was seeing some positive statements for peer review of the software. Generally, I'm seeing people are not interested in going past that to manuscripts and stuff, which is fine. I was just bringing up options since peer review might have been on our thing, so that's good we had that talk. So it sounds like we could just focus perhaps on the software side, and generally sounds like we don't necessarily want to kick people off completely, but we do want to have a peer review level standard that some folks can get into. And if you get into that, then you're more PyHC stuff and, benefits potentially with that. Yeah, so it sounds like, and there are some questions perhaps about funding. And so far, I think, Julie, you responded that that's what you and Sean are right now. You two are the funded people too. So if there is a review thing, then that was my presumption too, that it would heavily involve at least you and Sean, since that's what you all are doing so far.
Sure.
And then maybe another person, up to 5. It depends on how many people want. So.
And on how much can we get funded?
Did my summary sound reasonable to the people that are talking? When I have my slides up, I can't see the chat. So I'm not trying to ignore you, I just don't see it. Does that kind of sound like what people also were seeing for consensus?
I think so. Rebecca, Sean, I remember seeing a lot of messages from you guys back and forth. Does that sound like what you were thinking?
I didn't catch all of it, but I had a little distraction for a minute. But what I heard sounded Sounded good. Yeah, we don't want to. One of the things I was saying in the chat is that, with PyHC being mentioned in official NASA documentation, right, these proposal calls and such things, we really have to start acting carefully, because people are going to start coming to us looking for what software can we use for this and that. And we have to be careful not to remove resources that people use, even if it's a small number of people. As long as it works, right? Why not just let a link to that GitHub package live on the website? But if they really want to be seen positively by the community and used by more people, I mean, of course, they need to start aligning with not only open software standards, but PyHC standards, right? Because that makes the software more usable. That means, hey, this is probably going to work on my machine. And if not, someone will respond to my email, Not like I'm going to be buried in 100 lines of errors that no one's going to help me with. And that's the kind of perspective that I would have looking through a list of software. That's what the badges help us decide, right? What's probably going to work and what I have no idea if this is going to work. But I would definitely advise against removing packages from the PyHC website. But yeah, I completely agree with this whole idea of having certain badges or qualifying things or whatever you want to call them to give. I don't think status is the right word, but it's the closest one that I can think of. Workability. I can't think of the right word. I'm sorry. Someone else come up with that word.
Usability? I'm not sure.
Attractiveness, appeal, that's the right word. Like a community appeal for that package, right?
Yeah, you brought up some good points, Rebecca, especially like you don't want to kick it off if it works. And I can agree with that. I mean, you may have seen in news recently, I think both the Apple and Google stores are going through they're kicking some apps off that aren't working anymore, and it might take out about a third or something like that. So I'm all for being open to the extent that as long as it's not harmful to the community, because if somebody comes to PyHC and they see some software and if they go to use it and it doesn't work, then they might walk away going PyHC is not a good place to go. So, I mean, yeah, we think we need some balance between open, because that's good for making sure we get diverse ideas and capabilities, but make sure it's close enough that the stuff that's listed on the page is something that does operate and benefits.
And that's where I go back to this PDS model of saying you use at your own risk.
Sure.
This has not been officially blessed, but
Yeah.
it might work.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
And someone had in the chat about, was that John Neoff, about this has not been reviewed, and that's what you're talking about, Aaron?
Right, yes.
Yeah, and that's important too, because if like NASA is proposing, and we are certainly enthusiastically in favor of having software and data products count as scientific output, the same as papers, that needs to mean something, and it needs to be a quality thing. You say, I produced this software. If it's all stuff that, okay, well, it ran one time and now it's out there, it doesn't really work, that it's not a very valuable scientific output, and people will not eventually come to value that. But if it has a stamp that says PyHC approved this and it works and it's integrated with the core package, is like, wow, there's scientific value there, then people will start to value the software and the data elements as actual science output. So that we ought to try to foster that, right? It does mean something if you get incorporated in PyHC, or you did pass the PyHC review. That means there is a chance that someone else could use this. So having it mean something is important.
I would agree. And Rebecca brought up an interesting point of making a system of qualifying terms to indicate their status, PyHC verified, peer review in process, not reviewed, etc. Which kind of speaks to what you were talking about earlier, Sean, with having that third category at the very least of, we have other packages, but here are the other packages that at least have gone through a review process, and then here are the others that haven't done anything yet.
And then even periodic review, like Russell was saying, Google and Apple are like, all right, these are old ones. They're out now. It's too old. It doesn't work anymore. If we're honest about that too, that helps people that, you know, software doesn't stay valid forever. That's what we've been saying in multiple ways in this meeting, but yeah, because I think if we can reach a level where it does seem like you've added something valuable to the community, then it would start to count like publications. The fact that data somehow hasn't reached that level already is surprising. You produce a data set, that's a huge value. So if that hasn't done it yet, then it's going to be even harder with little software packages here and there.
Honestly, John, I think that with data, because the data is often tied to an instrument and a mission, it's usually, you get the mission paper, you often get the first light paper. And so it's maybe less critical for some of those folks because some of them are getting some recognition that way.
Yeah, but the grad students or master's level computer science physics people that produce the archive, they're still second-class citizens. Right?
Absolutely.
That's, I think we kind of have to fix that they are scientists. They produced the science data. It was their knowledge of the science and the process that enabled this data, which then enabled so many papers. So, you know, it's, again, we're tooting our own horns here, but it's, I think the community is leaning in that direction, and to support it with software, we need to have a scheme for indicating value. And we also need to devote time to the peer review like is done with the journals.
I agree.
Yeah, so it sounds like people are pro having the peer review in general, and it sounds like the third class on the projects page for things that do not have the PyHC badges for unreviewed, and then we already have PyHC badges for the good, so we could already probably use that, and then we've got the core, right? So it sounds like if we just get that third table, we're kind of in a good middle ground for everyone. Yeah. And then who's going to sort out the peer review process?
I guess that would start with Sean and I.
Probably
figuring that out and finding more than just Sean and I, some kind of committee. I don't know if that would, you know, once again, ping on the core packages, or if we ask some kind of volunteer status from people amongst the community, or yeah.
You really have to ask what you're demanding in the peer review. You're going to run all this software, making sure it all's working. There's lots and lots of stuff you could end up having to do. I think the peer review for planetary data system is often really not adequate. You know, so you really want people to dig deeply into this stuff and find out what the possible gotchas are and all that. And people just don't have time to do that. So you get.
So one thing with the peer review is that someone outside of the package is not going to have the time to go look through all of the details of that package, right? So they can go and test the general functionality of things. I mean, it's going to be up to the package maintainers and the people that use it to find all those nitty-gritty details. But I mean, same thing with the science paper, right? So the same person that reviews a science paper is not going to catch all of the details, right? And the person that writes it is not going to catch all of the details that are possibly wrong. You put out the best thing that that can get out there between you and the reviewer and the journal editor, of course. Because there's always people going back, even in science papers, to say, oh, this was wrong, so we're going to fix it here and see how the results changed, right? This is the science discussion, and that can be the same thing with software
Science is about, yeah.
It's not about perfection. It's about, okay, does this do what it says it does to the best of our knowledge, right?
Yeah, review for, I would say, functionality and standards, compliance, and all that kind of good stuff. Yeah, it's not easy to review software. It takes a long time, I found. So obviously, yeah, at peer review level, it's gonna, yeah, as Rebecca's saying, the people doing it can't be expected to do everything. But, you know, just like a science paper, it's gonna take some time and some effort. So I think for the committee, it probably does have to start with, you know, volunteers. I did say it should be an odd number, so I am putting an expansion in there, so I guess I should probably also put my name into the hat as a potential volunteer. But it doesn't have to be me. If somebody else is interested or willing, they them too. But yeah, I'd say
Maybe
probably
part-
volunteer. Go ahead, Aaron.
Maybe part of the review process is to have to demonstrate that this software has been used for a particular scientific use or whatever. So,
I also think
it is shown that it actually can work.
Sure.
I don't think the reviewers always necessarily need to be the same either. We could have a pool of 10 or
Oh, yeah.
12 people, and for any time review is needed, draw from that.
And I think
The
this
usual thing the journals do is anybody who publishes in the journal is fair game for a reviewer.
I like that.
So if you write software, you're fair game to be a reviewer of software.
You have 69 packages worth of people then.
And I think one thing too that would help the reviewers is if there's good test code or test cases or something that identify core or key pathways through the code. This is what has to work, and here's why I can demonstrate quickly that it does work, and here's how it's documented. Having a set of a punch list for the review and that test code that anybody could run quickly to demonstrate it.
Yeah, in my mind, I think for where I have the defined peer review process and standards, I think there's two halves on it. You have what the reviewers are actually expected to do and the standards by which they comport themselves and act and treat the applicants, as well as defining a list of all the stuff that the applicants are going to have to do to demonstrate their package. So I mean, the reviewers, I think they're to review, but I think it's probably incumbent upon the applicants to do some work ahead of time to make it possible for that review to happen. And I don't know exactly what those steps are right now. That's why I was kind of saying, I mean, we're talking about it, but to get a subcommittee to actually hash through some more of those details, like what's an appropriate amount of work to expect for the applicant, what's an appropriate amount of work on the peer reviewer. And we're talking about the fuller reviewers. Where do we start just with the core packages, or or anybody, or stuff like that. But then we'll probably have to have a subcommittee do that, and then probably a vote by the larger community to see whether or not they consider that acceptable. Is my thoughts or my current thinking on it.
I think that all sounds reasonable.
One thing I posted in the chat that may help with the review process is in order to have this like PyHC verified, or whatever we want to call it, status for any given package, and is to require them to go through to get a software paper published. Like, for example, a JOS paper published, because then, taking JOS as the example, JOS, the Journal of Open Source Software, goes through their own review of the software in quite detail, like high level of detail. So if something like that is required before PyHC will even take a look at it, that takes a lot of load of what the review process that PyHC has to go through. It really reduces that load because someone else already pulled the heavy weight. So that's a thought.
Great idea.
I like offloading that effort. Then we just have to check for our own standards.
Right, and then the question becomes, okay, if you allow people to publish their software paper in a variety of journals, well then the amount that PyHC has to check changes with what journal they choose. So the question becomes, do we want to allow them to choose their own journal just for the software itself, not the science part? Or do we want to choose what journal we want them to go through first, like a JOS paper? Now, to give an example, right, the Komodo paper we submitted to JOS, the open source software journal, was 2 or 3 pages long. The real work was just the software and all the pieces that go with it. So it's not, so the load on that publication isn't writing up the right thing like it is with a science paper. It's making sure the software is right. I don't have experience with a software publishing journal other than that, so other people have to speak to it.
Well, I kind of got the sense from other folks when I brought up the option of having a journal before that people didn't kind of like that. So
Right, and
I mean, I'm
because
not
there's
opposed to it.
the
I'm just saying,
yeah, there's of course the grandfathered in aspect where a lot of us already have papers published in other journals as the software paper, right? And no one should require a software package to go back into the another publication on the same stuff, right? That's not even publishable
right.
anymore. Well, I don't know, maybe, but so there has to be some sort of middle ground that we reach. But I would still encourage some sort of software oriented paper that's maybe not in a science journal. So to give an example, well, I guess the only experience I have is with Komodo. So Komodo has pursued the path of getting one of those JAS publications, but also on top of that basic publication, publishing science capabilities papers on top of that. Right, so demonstrating the use of such and such a portion of this package for this science goal, a different portion of the package for a different science goal, right? And as long as that science goal is strong enough that does support the publication of a science paper itself. There's an example. I'm not saying that's the thing we should go for, but the more software review load we can hand off to some other journal process, the better, right? Because then that's less work for us.
That is true, but then on one hand, then you're offloading the standards to somebody else and then you don't have control over them. I would kind of be more not have a PyHC requirement on a publication whatsoever. Like I think PyHC should just be PyHC. And I would actually kind of think it'd be good. You start to get, you get PyHC approved and then you do a journal submission, but that would be my thinking. I mean, I'm not saying I require it, but that.
Well, I wasn't saying that some other journal would verify the PyHC standards.
Sure.
That's not what JAS does for that example, but it
Right.
at least they check a ton of the details, and then on top of that, they at least ensure the thing works most of the way and it's usable. And on top of that, PyHC should definitely be the one to verify PyHC standards.
Sure, but as you mentioned, if people submit to other journals, then you don't know what they are. So at the end of the day, I think the PyHC reviewers aren't going to be able to, you know, count on what any journal does or be cognizant of what different standards different journals apply. So I think in practice, it would end up being the base case where you just got to look at it anyway.
That would not be fun. Could we partner with a software journal and like pull them in to verify the stuff that's not PyHC? Maybe that's a thing we could do. I think you suggested that.
That was one of the options. Yeah, that was like the middle ground where we talked to them. So we, you know, like this is where we submit PyHC stuff, and in exchange, you help apply these certain standards. And then that was the middle ground, is that the journal was still the journal. But then that was everybody went to that same kind of place. So it was easier just to manage as a group. You know, you don't have to worry about it. You just, this is the place we submit. And, you know, I mean, there's pluses and minuses to all those, but yeah, it just becomes a standard.
Okay, something like that.
Yeah,
I guess let's not be rude and go over time. We should probably hand this back to you, Julie.
Right.
It's 1 o'clock.
Yeah.
I don't know where I'm going. I'll hit stop.
There you go. Yeah, certainly a lot of interesting ideas. And at the very least, you know, once the summer school is done and we've wrapped that up a bit better and have more time to actually really put towards all of this, we could start with some talks, at least between Sean and I, to figure out how we might want to kick all this off and then, you know, go further out and bring more people into the mix and start some kind of process as far as this goes. So thanks for all of the ideas and suggestions and everyone who led discussions. Thank you very much. I had wrap-up slides. I won't show them because we're already a minute over, but I'm thinking after this meeting, I might send out a survey to people who had signed up and just get feedback on what we all liked, what we didn't like, what worked, what should we do differently next time, thoughts on, you know, hybrid maybe for the fall 2022 meeting, that would be great. Or if people still want to keep it virtual, responses will be, of course, anonymous so that you don't feel encumbered by that. And as far as things coming up next, if you already registered for our summer school, we're looking forward to seeing you there. If you didn't, you can still watch the YouTube live stream. I'll make sure to link that in notes that come out after this meeting has wrapped up and so forth. We submitted an AGU 2022 session proposal abstract, so waiting to hear back on that. And yeah, other than that, telecoms will start picking up again after the summer school, June 13th, and definitely going to be bringing in some decadal survey white paper refreshers on what we'd come up with previously and maybe workshop some new ideas so that we can be prepared for that deadline in August. And that's all she wrote. So thanks everyone. And I look forward to seeing you all again in the future at other PyHC activities.
Thanks very much, Julie. Good job.